They say the frontier is a crucible, a vast and unforgiving anvil upon which the souls of men and women are tested. It can break a person on the wheel of hardship, grinding them down to dust and despair, or it can forge them into something fierce and full of fire, their spirits as resilient as the prairie grass that endures the harshest winters. This is a story of that crucible, of a single act of compassion that sent ripples across a divided land, proving that the strongest bonds are not forged in iron, but in the quiet courage of a human heart. They say the frontier is a crucible, a vast and unforgiving anvil where a person's character is laid bare. On a chill October afternoon in 1867, with the sun hanging low and golden in a sky the color of pale cornflowers, Evelina Prescott learned the truth of this. At 17, she was a daughter of the Dakota Plains, with her father's unyielding grit in her bones and eyes that held the far-off look of a dreamer. Those eyes, the color of a stormy sky, refused to look away from anyone, a trait that sometimes unsettled the more timid folk in the territory. She rode her mare, Willow, with the easy confidence of someone who had learned the rhythm of a horse before she could properly walk. The wind, carrying the first real bite of the coming winter, whipped strands of her dark hair from their braid, snapping them against her cheek. It was a lonely sound in a land defined by its immense silence. The wide, open expanse of the Great Plains had long since ceased to amaze Evelina. It was simply home, a place of endless grass, relentless wind, and the daily, grinding chores of ranch life. Her soul, however, yearned for an adventure beyond mending fences and churning butter. She often found herself drifting off in daydreams of distant mountains and bustling cities she'd only read about in worn, dog-eared books, an unfortunate trait for someone tasked with keeping her eyes peeled for stray cattle. Her father, Silas Prescott, known simply as Silas to most, was a man carved from the tough timber of the frontier itself. He was a man of few words but unflinching moral character who preached the gospel of honest labor and a deep, abiding respect for the land and all its inhabitants. From him, Evelina had inherited her stubbornness and her sense of justice. Her younger sister, 12-year-old Maeve, had inherited their late mother's gentle spirit and wide, curious eyes. On that particular afternoon, Evelina was scanning the horizon for the familiar P brand of the Prescott Ranch on any wayward cow. The herd was mostly gathered, but a few head had wandered off toward the drying creek bed, and Silas had sent her to fetch them before dusk settled. Willow's ears suddenly perked, twitching back and forth. The mare's instinct, sharper than any human's, warned of something unusual. Evelina patted the horse's neck, her own senses instantly on alert. "Easy, girl," she murmured, her gaze narrowing. That's when she heard it, the faintest cry carried on the breeze. It was thin and desperate, almost lost in the rustle of the tall, dying grass. She reined Willow to a halt, straining to listen, her heart giving a sudden, anxious flutter. Was it a coyote? A calf caught in a thicket? The sound came again, higher pitched this time, unmistakably a cry for help. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Nudging Willow forward, she guided the mare with her knees, leaving her hands free. The faint sound led her toward a small rise overlooking a low, muddy patch near the creek. The area was notorious after the late summer rains, a place where the earth turned treacherous. At first, she saw nothing but churned-up mud, the colorless stalks of last season's reeds, and the skeletal branches of a lone cottonwood tree. Then, a frantic movement caught her eye, a flash of brown skin and dark, wet hair. Her breath hitched. There, mired in the thick, sucking mud, was a boy. He looked to be no more than 10 or 11, his arms flailing, his eyes wide, with a terror so pure It struck Evelina like a physical blow. He was a Lakota boy, his hair in braids now matted with grey sludge. He was sinking, already up to his chest, in the quicksand. Quicksand was a quiet killer on the plains. It looked like harmless mud, but once it had you, it held on with a cold, inexorable grip. A man or a horse could sink beyond help in mere minutes. The boy's face, slick with mud and tears, was a mask of primal fear. In that single, suspended heartbeat, as the wind moaned over the prairie, Evelina's daydreams of adventure dissolved. Reality, stark and terrible, stood before her, crying out for help. She had heard the stories, of course. The whispers around the trading post, the tense conversations between ranchers, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota the Sioux. There was an uneasy tension simmering between the new settlers and the tribes who had roamed these lands for centuries. Her father had always told her to respect everyone, to treat all people with fairness. But the unwritten law among many settlers was to keep your distance, to view every native as a potential threat. A few weeks prior, Jedediah Stone, a neighboring rancher with a notoriously short temper, had lost a horse and immediately blamed a nearby Lakota hunting party, though he had no proof. But looking at the terror in that boy's eyes, Evelina felt none of that fear or prejudice. She saw only a child, alone and on the verge of death. Conviction, swift and absolute, seized her. She had to help. In that moment, her life and the fate of the entire region changed forever. There was no time for hesitation. Evelina swung down from Willow's saddle, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth at the edge of the treacherous patch. She kept her eyes locked on the boy, wanting him to know he wasn't alone anymore. From her saddle, she grabbed her lariat, the worn leather familiar and reassuring in her hands. The boy was sinking deeper, the thick mud closing around his narrow chest. His skinny arms, shaking from cold and the sheer effort of staying afloat, were barely above the surface. Evelina's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the prairie's silence. "I'm here to help you," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "I won't let you sink." She wasn't sure if he understood a word of English, but she hoped the compassion in her tone would cut through his terror. She anchored her feet on a patch of firmer ground, praying it would hold her weight, and expertly swung the lariat. The rope sailed through the air and landed just short of his desperate grasp. He missed. A sob of frustration escaped his lips as the mud pulled him down another inch. "Again!" Evelina shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. She recoiled the rope, her movements swift and practiced. This time, she put more force into the throw. The loop landed perfectly over his head and shoulders. "Grab it! Hold on tight!" He clutched it with muddy hands, his wide, dark eyes filled with a desperate, dawning relief. Evelina wasted no time. She looped the other end of the rope around Willow's saddle horn, then took the reins. "Easy now, girl," she murmured, coaxing the horse backward. She needed steady tension, a slow, powerful pull that wouldn't injure the boy or drag him under. Inch by painstaking inch, the rope tightened. Willow, a strong and steady mare, leaned into the task, her hooves digging into the ground. Evelina kept a constant, soothing patter of words going, for the horse and for the boy. The mud fought them for every inch, making a grotesque sucking sound as it reluctantly released its victim. Finally, with a great heave from Willow and a final, desperate pull from Evelina, the boy came free. He tumbled onto solid ground, a trembling, mud-caked figure. He coughed and sputtered, spitting out sludge, the shock of the ordeal making him unsteady on his feet. Evelina was at his side in an instant, pulling a thick wool blanket from her saddlebag and wrapping it around his shivering shoulders. "You're safe now. I've got you. It's all right," she said, the words tumbling from her lips in the only language she knew. For a long moment, the boy just stared at her. His eyes, dark and deep, seemed to hold the entire vastness of the plains within them. He studied her face, his expression a mixture of confusion, exhaustion, and a gratitude so profound it needed no words. Then, without warning, his eyes rolled back and he slumped forward, unconscious. Adrenaline roared through Evelina. She struggled to keep him from falling back into the mud. He was light, but his limp body was awkward to hold. She needed to get him warm, get him home, find some of her mother's old remedies. Home. The thought was both a comfort and a new source of fear. Bringing a Lakota boy to the Prescott Ranch was a risk, a tremendous risk. Jedediah Stone or Deputy Caleb Finch might see. Rumors would spread like wildfire. But leaving him out here to die of exposure was not an option. It was never an option. With a grunt of effort, she gently hoisted his wiry frame onto Willow's back, laying him across the saddle. Then she climbed up behind him, holding him steady with one arm as she took the reins. She turned her mare for home, her mind racing. She was determined to save this life, no matter what judgment or danger awaited her. Half an hour later, Willow galloped into the Prescott Ranch yard. The sun was now a fiery smear on the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows from the clapboard house and the scattered outbuildings. Her father, Silas, stood near the barn corral, deep in conversation with their ranch hand, an older, quiet man named Abel Thorne. Both men stiffened as they saw her approach, their eyes fixing on the unconscious boy draped over her saddle. "What in tarnation?" Silas muttered, his weathered face etched with concern as he rushed over. His brow was a furrowed landscape of questions. Evelina slid down and carefully lowered the boy into her father's strong arms. "Pa, he was in the quicksand, near the creek. We've got to help him." End of 6. Silas exchanged a long, meaningful look with Abel, who frowned but moved forward to assist without a word. For a moment, Evelina saw the weight of the world settle on her father's shoulders. He was calculating the risks, the potential for trouble. But then he looked down at the boy's pale, muddy face, and the calculation was over. He was a father before he was anything else. "Bring him inside," Silas said, his voice low and firm. "Maeve, fetch some warm water and blankets. Now, oh." Inside the modest ranch house, the warmth of a crackling fire welcomed them. Evelina's younger sister, Maeve, gasped as they brought the boy in, her eyes wide as saucers. She immediately scurried to do as her father bid. Evelina rummaged through a wooden chest for some of her mother's old herbal remedies, salves for raw skin and tinctures to ward off fever. Her mother, Sarah, had passed from influenza a few years back, leaving a void in the house that Evelina tried her best to fill. Silas laid the boy gently on the settee near the fire, carefully peeling away the mud-caked clothes. "We'll do what we can," he said quietly, his gaze meeting Evelina's. "But if his tribe finds out he's here, well." He let the warning hang in the air, thick and heavy as smoke. Evelina understood the unspoken fear. Tensions on the frontier could escalate over the smallest misunderstanding. But she pushed that fear away, her focus narrowed to the fragile life lying before her. "Pa, we can't turn him away." "I know," Silas said with a heavy sigh. "Dr. Reed is out of town for the week. I might have to send Abel to Pine Creek for him tomorrow, though that's half a day's ride each way. Let's just see if he makes it through the night." Together, they cleaned the boy, carefully sponging away the layers of mud and wrapping him in fresh, warm blankets. Maeve hovered nearby, her initial shock replaced by a solemn sense of purpose. When the boy groaned softly, a collective sigh of relief filled the small room. Evelina set a pot of venison broth to simmer on the stove, hoping to coax him to sip some if he woke. Hours passed. Night deepened outside, and the ranch house fell quiet, except for the crackle of the fire and the occasional moan from the child. Evelina stayed by his side, dabbing his forehead with a cool cloth. In the flickering firelight, she studied his features, the delicate arch of his eyebrows, the high cheekbones, the braids undone by the mud. He looked so young and vulnerable, so utterly different from the hostile caricatures some settlers painted. Sometime after midnight, he opened his eyes. Confusion clouded them, and he tried to bolt upright, a flicker of panic returning. Evelina gently laid a hand on his shoulder. "Shh, you're safe," she whispered. She introduced herself, though she knew he likely wouldn't understand. He blinked, his gaze slowly clearing. "Chaitan," he murmured, his voice a dry rasp. He pressed a hand to his own chest. "Chaitan." Evelina smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Chaitan," she repeated softly. "I'm Evelina." Slowly, she lifted a steaming cup of broth to his lips. He sipped at first, then drank more eagerly. She saw the fear in his eyes recede, replaced by a profound exhaustion. He was alive, in that quiet, flickering firelight. As Chaitan drifted back into a fitful sleep, Evelina made a silent vow. She would protect him, at all costs. Morning light spilled through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the still form of Chaitan resting on the settee. His breathing had steadied during the night, a small but promising sign. Still, Evelina knew that infection was a real danger after such a trauma. "He needs a doctor, Pa," she said to Silas over a breakfast of coffee and hardtack. "We can't risk it." Silas nodded grimly. "I agree. Abel," he called out to the ranch hand, who was just coming in from the barn. "I need you to ride to Pine Creek. Find Dr. Reed. Tell him it's urgent." Abel Thorne, a man of few words and unwavering loyalty, simply nodded and headed out to saddle his horse for the long ride. With the immediate crisis managed, a tense quiet settled over the ranch. Father and daughter went about their daily chores, their movements almost automatic, their minds elsewhere. Every hour, one of them would slip back into the house to check on Chaitan. Maeve, meanwhile, hovered at the edges, nervous but fascinated by the presence of their Lakota guest. She would peek around the doorframe, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. Around noon, the sound of hoofbeats drummed in the yard too many for just one horse. Evelina's stomach clenched. Abel couldn't be back already. She peered through the window, her heart sinking. Two riders were approaching, Deputy Caleb Finch and the rancher Jedediah Stone. Finch was a man who followed the law to the letter even when the law was unjust. Stone was a man who followed only his own prejudices, his face permanently set in a scowl. "Pa!" she hissed, her voice tight with alarm. "Finch and Stone are here." Silas set down his coffee cup, his jaw tightening as he looked out the window. His eyes were grim. "Stay inside with Maeve. Keep that boy quiet. I'll handle them." But Evelina, as stubborn as her father, couldn't obey. She followed him to the front porch, standing just behind him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Silas," Deputy Finch said, tipping his hat slightly. His expression, however, was stern. "Finch, Jedediah," Silas returned, crossing his arms over his broad chest in a gesture that was both casual and defensive. "What can I do for you?" Jedediah Stone spat a wad of tobacco onto the dirt, his eyes scanning the ranch yard with open suspicion. "We're making the rounds," Finch explained, clearing his throat. "Warning, folks. There have been sightings of Lakota in these parts. Rumor has it they might be scouting ranches for raids." He glanced pointedly at some faint, muddy footprints near the porch, as though searching for evidence. "You seen anything unusual?" Evelina forced her face to remain a neutral mask, her ears strained, trying to hear past the conversation. For a terrifying split second, she thought she heard a faint rustle from inside, a soft moan from Chayton as Maeve tended to him. Could they hear it too? Silas's voice, however, was as steady as a rock. Haven't seen anything out of the ordinary, just the wind and the cattle. Stone squinted at Evelina, his eyes narrow and suspicious. Folks say you Prescotts are friendly with them Indians, maybe a little too friendly. Evelina bristled, her knuckles white. But before she could speak, Silas placed a calming hand on her shoulder. Now that's uncalled for, Jedediah, he said, his tone even but with an underlying edge of steel. We don't pick fights, we work our land and mind our own business, that's all. Finch leaned in from his saddle, lowering his voice. Be that as it may, Silas, if you see any sign of them, you best let us know. We have reason to believe they might be after stolen horses. Could be trouble. Evelina ground her teeth. She knew that rumors about Indian raids often floated around, fueled by fear and prejudice. But she also knew from her father's example that not all such stories were true or even half-true. Stone spat again, his gaze shifting past Silas to the house itself. Better not be harboring one of them in there. If the townfolk found out, well. He let the threat hang in the warm autumn air, ugly and sharp. Something flickered in Silas's eyes, a protective fire that Evelina recognized well, but he maintained his calm facade. We appreciate the warning. Now if you'll excuse us, we have chores to get back to. With a grunt, the two men turned their horses and headed down the dusty track. Only when they had disappeared around a bend did Evelina let out the breath she had been holding. She rushed inside to find Maeve peeking from behind a curtain, her eyes wide as saucers. On the settee, Chayton was lying still, but his eyes were now open, filled with a silent alarm. He had heard. It's all right, Evelina whispered, kneeling by his side. She gently squeezed his hand, hoping to convey a reassurance she didn't fully feel. If Deputy Finch or Jedediah Stone discovered Chayton, the Prescott family would be in serious trouble. But that was a risk Evelina and her father now seemed willing to take, for reasons that sprang from the heart, not from logic. The rest of the day passed in a tense quiet. By evening, Abel returned with Dr. Alistair Reed. The doctor, a kindly man with spectacles perched on his nose, blinked in surprise when he saw the Lakota boy. But after a meaningful glance at Silas and Evelina, he said nothing of it. Well then, he murmured, setting down his leather bag, let's have a look at our young patient. The old doctor examined Chayton by lamplight, checking for broken bones, measuring his temperature, and applying a soothing salve to the raw patches of skin where the mud had chafed him. He nodded approvingly when he saw how well Evelina had cleaned the boy's wounds. He'll need a few days of rest, maybe longer, Dr. Reed said, finally repacking his bag. Plenty of fluids and keep him warm. He's a lucky boy. Probably wouldn't have made it if you folks hadn't stepped in. Evelina's chest swelled with relief. She escorted the doctor outside, glancing around to ensure no curious neighbors were lurking in the twilight. Thank you, doctor, she whispered. Dr. Reed gave her a small, knowing smile. Silas is an old friend. I won't say a word, but you be careful, young lady. Folks around here can be riled up by the slightest thing. When he rode off, Evelina stood alone in the gathering dark, the wind carrying the faint rustle of tall grass. She shut her eyes, praying silently that the tide of fate would turn kindly for her family, and for the young boy whose life now rested in their hands. Over the next several days, a quiet routine settled over the Prescott Ranch, one that revolved around the slow, steady recovery of their secret guest. Chayton regained his strength. He spoke very little, whether from lingering weakness or the chasm of language between them. Still, Evelina noticed he seemed to understand more English words each day. He would watch their lips intently, his dark eyes sharp with intelligence. Maeve, Her initial nervousness, replaced by a deep well of empathy, became Chaitan's most devoted companion. She began bringing him small, silent gifts. One day, it was a carved horse figurine Silas had whittled for her years ago. The next, it was a handful of late-blooming wildflowers she'd found near the creek. Chaitan would accept these offerings with a shy gratitude, his solemn face sometimes breaking into a bright, fleeting smile that transformed him. In quiet moments, Evelina tried to piece together bits of his story. Through a combination of gestures, drawings in the dirt, and the few English words he knew, she learned that his father was an important figure in their band, a man whose name Chaitan pronounced as Wanblee. She gathered that Chaitan had wandered away from his camp while exploring, fascinated by the patterns the drying mud made, and that was when the quicksand had taken him. As the autumn wind grew sharper, Chaitan grew strong enough to walk around the ranch yard, always guided by Evelina or Maeve. He never strayed far, perhaps out of gratitude, or perhaps from a lingering fear of being discovered. Silas worried incessantly, warning everyone in the house to remain vigilant. The consequences, should Jedediah Stone or his ilk find out, could be dire. Ranchers in the territory were on a hair trigger, their fears stoked by rumors of conflicts with bands of Sioux, reports that often overshadowed years of peaceful coexistence. Despite these fears, a quiet camaraderie flourished inside the walls of the Prescott household. Chaitan took a liking to the ranch animals. He would watch with fascination as Evelina milked the cow or fed the chickens. Soon, he began to help, his movements deft and gentle. He had a natural way with the horses, speaking to them in soft Lakota words that seemed to calm them instantly. Evelina suspected it was his way of repaying the family's kindness. In the evenings, as the sun painted the sky in glorious pinks and oranges, Chaitan would sit by the fire and listen as Maeve hummed tunes their mother had once sung. His gaze often strayed to the horizon, as though he were searching for someone, waiting for the day he could return home. One afternoon, about a week into Chaitan's recovery, Evelina was teaching him the English words for the tools in the barn: hammer, nail, saw. He was a quick study, repeating the words in his soft, accented voice. Suddenly, Maeve came running from the house, her face pale. "Evelina, Mrs. Gable is here," she whispered frantically. Prudence Gable was a kindly woman in her 60s, but her curiosity could unravel a secret faster than a thief picking a lock. Panic seized Evelina. Chaitan was right here, in plain sight. "Get him behind the hay bales! Quick!" she ordered Chaitan, using a sharp gesture. He understood immediately and scrambled out of sight just as Prudence Gable rounded the corner of the barn, a basket of homemade apple preserves in her hand. "Evelina, dear," she called out, her smile wide. "What a surprise to find you out here." Evelina's pulse throbbed in her throat. She moved to intercept the older woman, placing herself bodily in her path. "Mrs. Gable, what a lovely surprise." "Afternoon, dear. I brought these preserves for you and your family. Thought you might want some for the winter," she said, her eyes trying to peer around Evelina's shoulder. "I thought I heard voices. Someone new working in your yard?" Evelina managed a casual laugh, though it felt brittle in her throat. "Oh, you must have seen Abel. He's been out here all day, working on a broken fence post. You know how it island." "Oh," the older woman frowned slightly, not entirely convinced. "Ah, I see. Well, I just wanted to check on you all. With all this talk of trouble brewing, a body can never be too safe. Folks are saying the Lakota are moving around. Some say they're trying to take land back." Evelina summoned her most polite expression, though her heart hammered with fear for the boy hiding just feet away. "We're fine, Mrs. Gable. Haven't seen anything unusual at all." "Oh." Prudence Gable nodded, then glanced toward the shadowy interior of the barn one last time. "Well, all right then. You keep your doors locked at night. I'd hate for anything to happen to you, sweet girls." After the older woman finally left, Evelina exhaled in a rush of relief. A moment later, Chaitan peered around the side of a hay bale, his eyes wide. She beckoned him over. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her hand on his shoulder. "Some folks, they might not understand. You're our friend." He nodded solemnly, stepping closer. Then he did something that surprised her. He placed a hand over his own heart and spoke softly in Lakota, the words flowing like a gentle river. She did not understand them, but the profound gratitude in his gaze needed no translation. That evening, as the first stars pricked the velvet darkness, Chaitan tried to explain through gestures and scattered English words that he was well now. It was time for him to return to his people. He didn't want to bring any more trouble upon them. Evelina's stomach twisted at the thought. She knew it was inevitable and right, but a strange sadness settled over her. She had saved a life, and in doing so, had found a friend in the most unlikely of circumstances. She only hoped that the day he left would come peacefully, and that it wouldn't bring sorrow for either of them. The decision was made. Chaitan's strength had returned with surprising vigor, and it was clear he was anxious to be with his family. He tried to convey that staying longer would only put the Prescotts in greater danger, a fact they couldn't deny. "The time has come," Silas said that evening, his voice heavy. He, Evelina, and Abel were gathered at the supper table after Maeve and Chaitan had gone to bed. "We have to get him back to his people." The question was how. Heading straight into Lakota territory was risky. If the tribe misunderstood their intentions, it could end badly. They might assume the Prescotts had abducted the boy, but letting Chaitan wander off alone was equally dangerous. He could get lost, fall victim to the elements, or worse, run into someone like Jedediah Stone. "I'll take him," Silas finally said, his voice low but firm. "I'm an old man. They can see I'm no threat. You and Maeve stay put." "But Pa," Evelina balked immediately. "It's too dangerous for you to go alone." She glanced toward the quiet part of the house where Chaitan slept, feeling a fierce, protective instinct for both him and her father. "That's final, Evelina," Silas said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If I don't come back by nightfall, you bolt the doors and wait for Abel or Dr. Reed. Do you understand?" Despite her protests, she eventually relented, her heart filled with a gnawing anxiety. Early the next morning, before the sun had even begun to pale the eastern sky, Silas saddled his old, reliable gelding. He prepared a second horse for Chaitan, along with a small pack of food and water. The farewell was quiet and somber. Maeve pressed the small wooden horse figurine into Chaitan's hand, tears welling in her eyes. Chaitan bowed his head in thanks, his expression solemn. Evelina walked with them to the edge of the ranch yard. "Safe journey, Chaitan," she whispered, placing a hand on his shoulder. He looked at her, his dark eyes conveying a world of unspoken gratitude. He then turned to Silas, a look of complete trust on his face. For hours after they left, Evelina paced the yard like a caged animal. She tried to busy herself with chores, but her mind was constantly on the two figures journeying across the plains. She scanned the horizon relentlessly, searching for any sign of their return. Maeve clung to her side, her small face a mirror of Evelina's own anxiety. By late afternoon, just as the shadows began to lengthen, faint shapes appeared in the distance. 2 riders. Evelina sprinted out past the corral, relief surging through her like a tidal wave when she recognized her father and Chaitan approaching. But as they drew closer, she saw a strange expression on her father's face, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and a lingering worry. "They're only a few miles out," he said, dismounting stiffly. He gave Chaitan a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Met up with his father, a man who calls himself Wanbli, and believe me, that man has a presence about him." Silas described the tense initial moments of the meeting, how the Lakota warriors had surrounded him, their faces like stone. But then Chaitan had rushed forward, explaining everything in a torrent of Lakota. "I think they believe us," Silas continued. "I explained what happened, even tried to show them with gestures. Chaitan did the rest. Their camp is preparing to move on." Evelina felt the tension drain from her body. "So, that's good news." Silas nodded, glancing at Chaitan. "It island. But here's the strange part. Wandley wants Chaitan to stay with us one more night. Then tomorrow, he'll walk back to their camp. Something about needing to honor a promise before he leaves." Oh, that evening, the atmosphere in the small ranch house was different. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, bittersweet sense of an ending. They gathered around the supper table, and Chaitan ate with them. No longer a secret guest, but an honored friend. When dinner was finished, he slipped outside. Evelina watched him through the window as he scanned the sky, where the first stars were winking into view. Something in his posture, a sense of purpose, drew her out. She followed him, her boots stepping carefully over the crisp grass. He turned as she approached. He pointed upward at the vast, glittering sprawl of constellations overhead. Then he touched his chest, and finally, the ground beneath their feet. He was trying to convey something profound, she sensed, something about his connection to the earth and the sky, a bond that transcended language. The moment felt sacred, a pocket of stillness in the heart of the Wild West, where two people from different worlds found common ground under a shared firmament. In a halting mixture of English and Lakota, he said something that sounded like, "I not forget, friend, always." Tears burned at the corners of Evelina's eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. There, in the profound silence of the starlit night, they forged a bond that no prejudice, no distance, could ever truly break. At dawn, Chaitan departed. Silas offered to ride with him, but the boy insisted on walking alone, a testament to his regained strength and his newfound confidence. Evelina walked him to the edge of the Prescott property line. Her throat felt tight with an ache she couldn't articulate. She remembered the terrified boy she had pulled from the quicksand, how he was on the brink of death. Now he stood before her, tall and proud, a young Lakota boy on the threshold of manhood. The horizon seemed to welcome him home. "Tate," she whispered, using the name he had first told her. "Safe journey." He gave her a solemn nod, pressed the small wooden horse to his heart one last time, and then turned and strode away into the sea of grass. Evelina stood there for a long time, watching his small figure diminish until it was swallowed by the prairie. Only then did she realize the morning sun was glinting off the tears on her cheeks. Life on the Prescott Ranch returned to a semblance of normal in the following weeks, yet an undercurrent of change remained. The secret they had kept now rested between them, a shared experience that had bound the family closer together. The creeping worry that Deputy Finch or Jedediah Stone might learn what had happened never fully subsided, but it was overshadowed by the memory of Chaitan's quiet dignity and the starlit promise of friendship. Autumn gave way to the icy grip of winter. Snow blanketed the prairie in silent, white drifts, erasing the landscape and forcing a period of hibernation. The Prescotts hunkered down, rationing supplies, tending to the animals in the biting cold, and waiting for the first thaw of spring. In the long, dark evenings, gathered around the fire, Evelina's mind often drifted back to that night. She would trace the constellations through the frosted window pane, thinking of the bond she'd formed with a boy she barely knew, yet somehow understood completely. Meanwhile, in the nearby settlement of Pine Creek, men like Finch and Stone continued to stir the pot of fear. They whispered about upcoming raids, painting nightmares of stolen horses and burned barns. Silas would shake his head in disgust when he heard the rumors on his infrequent trips to the trading post, but worry still took root in Evelina's chest. She knew that fear was a powerful weapon, and men like Stone were experts at wielding it. Come the first hint of spring, the world began to awaken. Meltwater trickled across the land, turning patches of the prairie to soggy mire. The air grew warmer, carrying the scent of damp earth and new life. The Prescotts prepared for calving season, their days filled with the hard, satisfying work of patching fences and repairing the barn roof after the heavy snows. On a cold, windy dawn in early April, Evelina was woken by the sound of a horse whinnying in alarm from the corral. She sprang from her bed, her heart pounding. Peering out her small window, she saw Maeve standing in the yard, still in her nightdress, staring westward with eyes like saucers. Evelina's pulse skipped a beat. She threw on a dress and boots, rushing outside, nearly tripping on the porch steps in her haste. "What is it?" she demanded, her breath steaming in the crisp air. Maeve, trembling, could only point. "Look." At first, Evelina saw nothing but the rolling, empty plains, still brown and weary from winter. Then she noticed it, a long, winding line of figures approaching from the west. It wasn't just a few riders. It was a procession of men, women, and horses, stretching across the horizon like a great, slow-moving serpent. They were heading directly for the Prescott Ranch. Her heart raced, a wild bird trapped in her chest. She feared the worst. A war party. The Lakota coming to exact vengeance for some perceived wrong, real or imagined. The fears stoked by Jedediah Stone suddenly felt terrifyingly real. She bolted inside. "Pa, get the rifle!" Silas was already awake, drawn by the commotion. He came out onto the porch, rifle in hand, but he did not raise it. Caution, not aggression, was etched on his face. Abel Thorne appeared from the bunkhouse, his own shotgun held loosely at his side. The line drew closer, and details began to emerge from the mass of figures. It was a procession of Lakota families. Trailing behind their sturdy ponies were dozens of Travois, the traditional A-frame sleds used for transporting goods. Each was laden with bundles covered in hide or cloth. This was no war party. Leading the way was a tall man wearing regalia that hinted at leadership, his bearing proud and solemn. And riding by his side, on a fine pony, was a teenager who looked startlingly familiar. Chayton, though he was taller now, more confident, his face filled out with the strength of the intervening months. Evelina gasped, tears of disbelief welling in her eyes. Chayton lifted his hand in a slow, deliberate greeting. Evelina felt her heart, which had been hammering with fear, now soar with a joy so intense it stole her breath. Slowly, carefully, the Prescott family moved forward to meet the approaching group. Silas held his rifle across his arm in a non-threatening manner, but anxiety still radiated from him. He hadn't forgotten how quickly misunderstandings on the frontier could spiral into bloodshed. The Lakota man at the front, whom Evelina recognized from her father's description as Wanbli, wore a solemn, respectful expression. He halted his pony a respectful distance from the family. Chayton dismounted and stepped ahead, his chest rising with a deep breath. "Evelina," he said, his voice more assured in English than she remembered. Overjoyed, she placed a hand over her heart. "Chayton, you're back." He glanced at his father, then back at Evelina. He drew himself up tall and addressed Silas. "My father greets you," he said, his English still halting but carefully practiced. "We bring gifts, gratitude for saving me." Evelina's gaze swept over the procession behind him. She counted them in stunned disbelief. 10, 20, 30, 40 Travois. Each was piled high with goods beautifully tanned hides, thick buffalo robes, finely crafted blankets woven with intricate patterns, bundles of dried meat, and pouches of intricate beadwork. The sheer, overwhelming generosity of the gesture took her breath away. 40 Travois. She had never seen anything like it in her life. Wanbli spoke in Lakota, his voice carrying a melodic authority that seemed to hush the wind itself. Chaitan translated, sometimes stumbling over the words, but conveying the meaning with earnest clarity. He says you saved his son, his only boy. For that, our band is in your debt. He says a life saved is a life bound. He brings these gifts and his blessing upon your house. Overcome with emotion, Silas lowered his rifle entirely. He stepped forward, his own eyes misty. We never expected anything like this. We only did what was right. Wanbli nodded once, a gesture of profound respect. His gaze flicked to Evelina. He stepped closer and spoke in broken English, each word weighted with sincerity. Father must thank father, but also thank daughter. He pointed gently at Evelina. Daughter is brave. Evelina felt a warm flush creep up her cheeks. She bowed her head slightly, unsure of what to say. Then, the Lakota families began unfastening the bundles from the travois, arranging them in neat piles before the Prescott family. The scene was surreal, an outpouring of thanks so immense it seemed to span the entire ranch yard. Wordlessly, Maeve joined Evelina, tears streaming down her wide-eyed face. The weight of the gifts and the significance of this incredible moment were almost too much to comprehend. This was not just a thank you, it was a powerful statement, a bridge being built in a land of fences and fear. The spectacle of a large Lakota gathering at the Prescott Ranch did not go unnoticed. Like smoke signals on a clear day, word of their arrival spread with astonishing speed. One by one, neighboring ranchers and homesteaders rode up, their curiosity inflamed. They kept their distance at first, forming a loose, watchful circle around the property, their faces a mixture of suspicion and awe. Evelina's initial joy was tempered by a fresh spike of fear. She spotted Deputy Caleb Finch and William Jacob Brown among them, cantering up on horseback, their expressions thunderous. For them, this was not a gesture of peace, it was an invasion. Wanbli must have noticed the shift in the atmosphere. He spoke a quiet word, and his people remained calm, their dignity an unspoken rebuke to the hostility gathering at the edges of the yard. Silas took a deep breath and stepped forward, facing the crowd of gawking onlookers. Deputy Finch dismounted, his hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. "What's going on here, Silas?" he barked, his voice echoing across the yard. Evelina inhaled sharply. She realized in that moment, more than ever, how delicate the situation was. One wrong word, one spark of misunderstanding could set this fragile peace ablaze. But she also felt a new resolve blossoming within her, a courage she didn't know she possessed. She would not let fear and hatred drown out what was right. Silas motioned for silence. He spoke in a clear, steady tone, addressing not just Finch, but all the gathered neighbors. "These people have come in peace." He gestured to the shimmering piles of gifts. "They're here to thank us for saving a boy's life from the quicksand last fall. He's standing right here, alive, because my daughter risked her own neck to save him." Jedediah Stone spat on the ground, a scowl twisting his mouth. "They say one thing, but how do we know they won't turn on us tomorrow? This is a trick." A few nervous murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. Roach's gaze flickered warily between the Prescott family and the Lakota. "We've had rumors of stolen horses, Silas. We can't just ignore that." Evelina's heart pounded, but she stepped forward, standing beside her father. She would not be silent. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. "You all know us. You know the Prescott name stands for honesty. We have never lied to any of you, nor caused you trouble. If we say these people come in peace, why won't you trust our word?" The onlookers shuffled uneasily. Among them were a few ranchers like Orville Hayes, who had always shared a cordial relationship with Silas, men and women who respected the Prescotts enough to consider their word. Others, more hardline in their views, frowned in distrust. The tension hovered like a hot wire. Behind Evelina, Chayton clenched his fists, clearly wanting to defend his people. Wanbley spoke a few quiet words in Lakota to his son, who then nodded and addressed the crowd himself. "We come to thank the Prescotts for saving my life," Chayton said, his voice ringing with sincerity. "We bring these gifts so you will see we are not enemies." He paused, gathering the right English words. "My father, my family, we do not want war. We want peace." Deputy Finch's eyebrows lowered. The possibility of a quiet resolution seemed to war with the ingrained fear and official duty within him. Stone, on the other hand, glowered. "They speak with forked tongues," he muttered loud enough for all to hear. "Next thing we know, they'll be setting our barns on fire." At that, Orville Hayes, a tall, thoughtful rancher who had known Silas for years, spoke up. "Now hold on, Jedediah. The Prescotts are no fools. If they vouch for these folks, I'm inclined to believe them. We all heard the story of how Evelina saved that boy. I, for one, am starting to think it's true." A ripple went through the crowd. The story of Evelina's rescue had quietly spread, but many had dismissed it as a tall tale. Now, faced with the living evidence of a grateful Lakota boy and 40 Travois of gifts, it was impossible to deny. The sheer scale of the gesture was a powerful argument against malice. Stone sputtered, "Don't tell me you're convinced by some puppy dog eyes and a pile of skins." But his voice lacked the iron conviction it had earlier. The calm dignity of the Lakota and the undeniable evidence of their gratitude were speaking volumes. Silas gently rested a hand on Stone's shoulder. "Jedediah, we've known each other a long time. You know me. I'd never do anything that would endanger this community. Believe me, there is no trick here." Cornered by reason and the shifting mood of the crowd, Stone huffed angrily and backed away, silenced for the moment. Deputy Finch, still wary, seemed to soften slightly, though his posture remained tense. In the hush that followed, Wanbley turned to Evelina. He placed his hand over his heart and spoke in his gentle, resonant voice. He then reached for one of the most ornate blankets from the Travois, its pattern woven in bright geometric shapes of red, yellow, and blue. He draped it softly around Evelina's shoulders. Chayton translated quietly, his voice filled with emotion. He says, "This is for your bravery and your kindness. May you always be wrapped in warmth and good fortune." Eyes brimming with tears, Evelina touched the soft wool of the blanket reverently. She glanced at the crowd. Many watched with awe, and a hint of shame flickered across some of their faces as they witnessed the sincere, profound gratitude behind the Lakota leader's gesture. The tension had not vanished, but an opening for them to see each other's humanity. From that moment, the Prescott Ranch became the scene of an unexpected and unprecedented gathering. Seeing that immediate violence was unlikely, Wanbley signaled to his people. They set up a temporary camp a short distance from the barn, moving with quiet efficiency. The air soon filled with the scent of cooking fires and the murmur of conversation. Some of the neighboring ranchers rode away, still uneasy, while others, like Orville Hayes, stayed, their curiosity overriding their apprehension. For the next 2 days, a fragile but beautiful cultural exchange unfolded. Visitors trickled in, some from nearby homesteads, some from as far as Pine Creek. Dr. Reed, hearing the commotion, arrived to find the yard teeming with Lakota families, their children playing near the corral, while the adults spoke quietly amongst themselves. He was stunned, but quickly became enthralled. Slowly, carefully, The Prescotts began to introduce their neighbors to the Lakota. Maeve, with her childlike innocence, became the chief ambassador. She giggled with Lakota girls over shared pieces of cornbread, showing them how to feed the chickens while they, in turn, taught her a few words in their language. Silas and Wunbley, two patriarchs from different worlds, found common ground. They spoke through Chaitin, bridging the language barrier to discuss everything from horse rearing to the fickle nature of the prairie weather. A mutual respect grew between them, man to man. Some ranchers, like Orville, began to trade, exchanging sacks of dried corn for intricate Lakota beadwork. Others, more suspicious, hovered at the edges, their arms folded, their faces set in scowls. But the seeds of understanding had been planted. The presence of 40 Travois, laden with gifts, was a sight no one would forget. It was an act of goodwill so grand it challenged the easy narratives of hostile Indians repeated in town. Deputy Finch maintained a watchful presence, and on the second day he escorted Colonel Robert Nicholson, a local official, to the ranch. Nicholson was a wiry man with a sharp, intelligent gaze, cautious yet open to reason. After careful observation and a long private discussion with Silas and Wunbley, with Chaitin translating, Nicholson concluded that this was no threat, but a sincere act of gratitude. He quietly advised Finch to let the event run its course peacefully. Throughout it all, Evelina felt her heart swell with a mix of pride, relief, and hope. She and Chaitin spent hours talking, him practicing his English, her stumbling through the few Lakota phrases he shared. She learned about his mother, who wove blankets with patterns that told the stories of their ancestors. He learned that her mother had died, leaving an emptiness she tried to fill with the endless work of the ranch. Amidst these moments of kinship, the brutal reality of the frontier still pressed at the edges. Deputy Finch insisted that the Lakota's presence must be temporary. The townsfolk, he said, wouldn't tolerate a long-term camp so close to their settlements. Wunbley nodded in understanding. His band was on their way to a traditional gathering place for the warmer months and needed to continue their journey. But before leaving, they planned one final gesture. Chaitin explained that his father would hold a small ceremony to honor Evelina's life-saving act. It would be held the following evening, at sunset. As dusk approached the next day, the Lakota lit small fires in a circle near the ranch house. The fading sun cast ribbons of gold and purple across the sky. Curious neighbors gathered again, keeping a respectful distance this time, the hush of the moment turning them into silent observers. Evelina stood beside Silas, her nerves fluttering. She wore the simple dress she had mended a dozen times, feeling out of place and worried about intruding on something so sacred. But Chaitin had assured her that her presence was essential. This ceremony, he explained, was about recognizing the bond that had been forged that autumn day. Wunbley stepped into the center of the circle, carrying a small, beautifully decorated bundle. He spoke in Lakota, his voice rising and falling with a ceremonial cadence. Chaitin translated for the Prescotts and the onlookers. He says, "This is a ceremony of the Wichasha Wakang, the sacred bond. He calls the one who saved him a sister to our people." A ripple of awe went through the gathering. Wunbley drew out a beautifully beaded necklace from the bundle. Intricate patterns of red, yellow, and white beads glimmered in the firelight. He approached Evelina with deliberate reverence and placed the necklace gently around her neck. Chaitin's voice trembled slightly as he translated his father's words. He says, "When you found my son in the earth, you gave him back to the sky. This necklace is a sign that you are part of our circle now. Your heart is known to us." Evelina's eyes brimmed with tears. She barely breathed as the weight of the necklace settled on her collarbone, its beads cool against her skin. The air crackled with an electric hush. Then, as if on cue, Several Lakota men and women began a low chant. The melody was ancient and powerful, sending vibrations through Evelina's chest. The circle of onlookers watched in silent reverence. Some were teary-eyed, others touched by a sense of unity they had never thought possible. Even Deputy Finch, standing near his horse, appeared moved, though he tried to hide it behind a stoic expression. As the chanting rose, Chayton stepped forward. He took both of Evelina's hands in his. "You saved me," he said softly, the flickering firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "I will always remember." In that moment, under the vast, star-dusted canopy of the prairie sky, the tension, fear, and prejudice that so often plagued the frontier seemed to melt away, leaving only a raw, human truth. Compassion knows no boundary of race or creed. For once, the Great Plains sang a song of unity. The Lakota spent another 2 days at the Prescott Ranch, and during that time, the climate of the entire settlement seemed to shift. While many, like Orville Hayes, overcame their misgivings, a persistent handful, led by Jedediah Stone's bitter rhetoric, still grumbled. Stone pressed Deputy Finch to order the Lakota off the land, but Finch, perhaps tempered by the ceremony he had witnessed, recognized the goodwill at play and allowed Wanbley's people the leeway to depart peacefully when they were ready. By the time the Lakota caravan prepared to move on, something remarkable had happened. A seed of mutual respect had taken root. A few ranchers who had initially eyed the Lakota with mistrust now offered small gestures of friendship, exchanging goods, sharing a pipe, or simply talking about the land they all inhabited. The morning of their departure was filled with a bittersweet air. Maeve found herself weeping as she hugged the Lakota girls goodbye. The families loaded their gifts and supplies back onto the Travois, though they insisted on leaving many items with the Prescotts as permanent tokens of friendship. Chayton said his farewells, promising to return when the seasons changed again. As Evelina embraced him one last time, she realized how uncertain life on the frontier could be. One day, you are saving a boy from quicksand. The next, you are standing in a circle of fires, receiving an honor you never dreamed of. And tomorrow was always a question mark. The colorful caravan stretched out across the plains once more. Evelina and her family stood watching until they were distant specks on the horizon and then were gone. A profound hush settled over the ranch yard, leaving behind an afterglow of wonder. Though the Lakota had left, the story of their visit, the spectacle of 40 Travois, loaded with gifts spread like wildfire through the region. It became a legend, a tale told by travelers, trappers, and peddlers. Some reacted with wonder, seeing it as a sign of possible harmony. Others, like Stone, scoffed, insisting it was a fluke or part of some cunning ruse. The Prescott Ranch found itself a reluctant center of attention. Evelina and Silas politely declined requests for interviews from small newspapers seeking a sensational story. It was about saving a child, they insisted, not about politics. Life proceeded peacefully for the remainder of that spring until an early summer afternoon brought a harsh reminder that not everyone embraced peace. Orville Hayes rode into the yard at a breakneck speed, his face pale with worry. "Silas," he cried, stumbling from his horse. "It's Jedediah Stone and some of his men. They're riding to flush out a group of Lakota they heard were passing near Pine Creek. They're spoiling for a fight. From the description, it might be a different band, but they don't care." Alarm jolted Evelina. She and Silas saddled their horses at once. Maeve, tears in her eyes, begged to come, but Silas refused, insisting she stay behind with Abel to guard the ranch. Evelina rode alongside her father and Orville, dust kicking up behind them as they raced toward Pine Creek. As they neared the outskirts of the territory, they saw a plume of smoke in the distance. A cold, sick feeling churned in Evelina's gut, the smell of burning wood stung her nostrils. They soon found themselves at the edge of a scorched patch of land, where a small, hastily abandoned Lakota camp had clearly been. The remnants of tippy poles lay scattered, fires had been stamped out, belongings were left behind in panic. "They attacked them!" Evelina cried, her heart hammering as she scanned the area for survivors. Orville shook his head grimly. "Looks like they fled before Stone's men arrived. Thank the Lord. But Stone torched whatever was left." Silas seethed with a quiet, terrible anger, his face darkening like a thunderhead. For what? Fear? Hatred? Damn fools. They searched the area, finding no bodies, only the heartbreaking remnants of a hurried evacuation. Suddenly, hoofbeats thundered. Evelina turned to see Deputy Finch approaching, accompanied by half a dozen men, including Jedediah Stone. The acrid smell of smoke clung to them. Stone's face twisted in a sneer. Well, well, the Prescotts come to help your pet Indians." Burning camps now, Jedediah?" Silas snarled. "Is that how you keep the peace?" Deputy Finch, looking grim, intervened. "We had orders to investigate suspicious activity. The Lakota were gone when we arrived. A warning shot must have spooked them. The fire was an accident." "Accident, my hide," Orville roared. "You're out for blood." "Keep your mouth shut, traitor," Stone bristled, jabbing a finger at Orville. "I won't have these savages lurking near my ranch." "Oh." Evelina's anger flared, hot and bright. She faced the men, her chest tight. "These people are families. They have children. They are not outlaws. You saw the gifts they brought to us? They only want peace." Stone spat on the ground. "Their peace means nothing if they think they can claim our land. It's best they learn who's in charge here." Hot tears pricked Evelina's eyes, but she would not show weakness. "The Great Plains belong to no one man," she whispered fiercely, echoing a concept she had heard from Chayton. "And you have no right to burn their homes." A tense standoff formed, broken only by Deputy Finch clearing his throat. "The group is gone. No one was killed. Let's all keep our heads. This matter is done." His tone suggested he didn't fully believe his own words, but he wanted to de-escalate the situation. Stone snorted, jerking his horse around. "We'll see if it's done." He galloped off, his men trailing behind him, a posse of ignorance and hate. The swirl of dust they kicked up felt like an ominous warning. The embers of hatred, Evelina realized, were much harder to extinguish than a campfire. The days that followed the camp burning were restless and filled with a low-grade dread. Rumors surged through Pine Creek that Jedediah Stone was rallying a permanent patrol to cleanse the area of any native presence. The fragile peace that had blossomed at the Prescott Ranch seemed to hang by a thread. Evelina barely slept, her dreams haunted by the image of the scorched earth and the thought of innocent families fleeing in terror. Then, one crisp morning just after dawn, Evelina spotted a lone rider approaching the ranch. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was Chayton. He rode hard, his face lined with a weariness that went beyond his years. She raced outside to meet him. "Chayton, you're safe!" He nodded, dismounting from his tired pony. "We are safe, but we run, again and again. Stone's men, they chase us. My father says we must go far, beyond the great river, to our family there. But we need supplies." They burned everything. Silas joined them on the porch, his face grim but his voice steady. "You'll have what you need, son. Food, blankets, whatever we can spare." That night, they worked under the cover of darkness. It was too risky to bring the wagon to the ranch, so they packed flour, dried meat, coffee, and blankets onto several pack horses. Evelina and Maeve worked quietly, their hands flying, while Chayton, despite his exhaustion, helped load the supplies. There was no question of repayment, no talk of debt. This was an act of friendship, pure and simple. By dawn, Silas, Evelina, and Chayton led the pack horses out toward a wooded ravine several miles away, where Chayton said his people were hiding. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the grass set Evelina's nerves on edge, but they reached the camp safely. There they found Wanbley and about 20 other families, weary and displaced, but alive. The reunion was somber. Silas and Wanbley embraced silently, a moment of shared understanding and sorrow that was beyond words. Maeve had insisted on sending along some of her old shawls and dolls, which Evelina now handed to the wide-eyed Lakota children. The Lakota tried to offer what few items they had saved as gifts in return, but Silas and Evelina gently refused. This was not about a transaction. As they prepared to leave, Chayton held Evelina's arm. "I wish I could repay you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You already have," she replied, holding back her own tears. She felt the smooth beads of the necklace beneath her coat, a constant reminder of their bond, a bond that endured through fire and fear. As they rode away, Wanbley offered a final message, translated by Chayton. "Our hearts travel together. The thread is not broken." Evelina watched the Lakota families fade into the prairie landscape, uncertain if she would ever see them again, but knowing that the invisible thread that connected their hearts would never truly break. Summer settled over the plains, and the tensions slowly eased. Stone's patrols fizzled out, having never found Wanbley's people, who had likely crossed the Missouri River to safety. Whispers persisted, but the threat of open violence receded. At the Prescott Ranch, life resumed its familiar rhythm. Fences needed mending, cattle needed tending, and settlers began to talk of the railroad that was pushing relentlessly westward. But something within the family and within the community had shifted forever. Evelina often found herself pausing at sunset, her eyes scanning the vast horizon. The Lakota caravan didn't return that year or the next. But word trickled in. Traders and trappers who traveled far to the west spoke of a growing Lakota band led by a wise man named Wanbley, and of his son, Chayton, a respected young warrior who sometimes spoke of a white girl he called the sister who saved me. The name always warmed Evelina's heart. Then, one golden autumn day, 3 years after Chayton had vanished into the west, a group of riders appeared on the horizon. Evelina stepped outside, her breath catching in her throat. At the lead was Chayton. He was a man now, older, stronger, his face bearing the wisdom of his travels, but his smile was the same. He had returned not with gifts of gratitude, but with gifts of friendship. They shared news, stories, and laughter. Evelina realized then that the rope she had thrown into the quicksand so long ago had not just saved a life, it had woven a bond that time and distance could not sever. Each year after that, as the prairie grass turned to gold, Chayton's people would pass through the territory, always stopping at the Prescott Ranch. They came not as strangers, but as friends, slowly, patiently, bridging a cultural chasm that had once seemed impassable. The legend of the 40 Travois lived on, a testament told around campfires and in ranch houses, a powerful story of how compassion could echo far beyond a single act. On a once-divided prairie, under a sky that belonged to everyone, 2 worlds had learned to walk side by side, and the simple, brave kindness of a rancher's daughter had, against all odds, transformed a region forever.